I understand that in Burkina Faso, I mean, that was the poorest country I saw. And I understand the frustrations of the people very much. To me, regardless of the politics, it never sits comfortably to see a person in uniform running a country. The military should be subservient to the civilian government and not the other way around.
You were also ambassador to Burkina Faso and Togo, am I correct?
Yes, and Benin as well. And I'm following very closely what's going on in Togo next door to you, because there are signs of unrest and protest against, the guy and his father, the Nassingbes, have been in charge for nearly 60 years, which is not healthy.
No.
And there are increasing protests there, which I'm no doubt you in Accra are following.
What do you want to see happen in Togo? I mean, in the midst of all the confusion that's happening right now, what do you want to see happen there?
Well, I don't want to dictate what should happen. Obviously, it's got to be up to the people of Togo, but they can only express that in really free elections and in having a genuine choice. And what's happened is Nasingbe has constantly changed the constitution in order basically to keep himself in power. Something, unfortunately, we see in too many parts of Africa, whether it's Equatorial Guinea, or we saw it in Gambia. You remember during my time in Ghana, we see it in many countries. But Nasingbe and his father, who took power in a coup, have been there since the 1960s. I mean, this is ridiculous. You can't have a one family dynastic rule.
Yeah.
And of course, what happens when you have no checks and balances?
Right.
No proper opposition, no free journalism, and lots of repression of people, is you just get more and more corruption. And Togo is a very poor country, as you know. I'm sure you've been.
Right.
I used to go regularly, and when you cross the border in Aflao, you feel it immediately that Togo is way behind Ghana, with less freedom and less and more poverty, and the people of Togo deserve better.
Yes, you are very, very right. So there is a demonstration happening right there in Togo as we speak right now, and it's all over in the news. John Benjamin was also, in fact, the High Commissioner of the UK to Togo, in fact. And of course, Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
I mean, whilst you were here, Alassane Ouattara was in La Côte d'Ivoire. I'm sure you might have spoken with him, because I know that you speak French. And also, over there in Burkina Faso, there was Ibrahim Traore. But Ibrahim Traore was not the president. Now he is the leader of the people of Burkina Faso. What does that say to you?
I understand that in Burkina Faso, I mean, that was the poorest country I saw. And I understand the frustrations of the people very much. Wonderful people. I think Burkina Faso is a mixture of two of the local languages, and it means kind of like the upright man or the upstanding person.
Correct.
I think so. I understand some of the sentiment behind Traore. The only problem is that what we should all aspire to is representative government with proper checks and balances, with legitimate politics on all sides and frequent elections and occasional changes of power, like you've managed in Ghana several times. And to me, regardless of the politics, it never sits comfortably to see a person in uniform running a country.
Right.
The military should be subservient to the civilian government and not the other way around. However, I do understand the huge dissatisfaction. Of course, Traore, when he was, I forget how long he was president of Burkina, but it was many decades, again, without the possibility of removing him from power. And there are, of course, some great examples in Africa, apart from Ghana, that people can follow, particularly Botswana and Namibia, where they have free elections and peaceful changes of power, and the military are completely subservient to civil political power. So it's possible. Of course, you've got just amongst your neighbors there in Ghana, you've got many different examples of different ways of doing things. But I do believe that an open society, a free society, is the best model.
Ibrahim Traore seems to have a lot of support from across the world. What is your relationship with him in terms of the UK and Burkina Faso?
Well, he's taken his distance, as you know, not just from the West in general and from France in particular, which was the colonial power before independence. But also, he's left ECOWAS, right, together with the leaders of Mali and Niger. So he's taken his distance from Ghana and other West African countries in that sense. I understand the popularity. And of course, in Thomas Sankara, they have a kind of historical role model.
Right.
But the problem is that someone like that, they always say that they're going to hand the country back through democratic elections. And then often, sadly, across the years, they never do that. And they just turn into another African strongman. And of course you can start with a huge wave of popularity and then never let go of power, and you end up very unpopular.
Interesting. Now, we see a lot of coup d'etats around Africa every now and then. Do you think that a time will come when there will be a coup d'etat in the UK?
No, because the institutions are so well established and the military are so non-political. And so clearly subservient to civil rule, which means in practice the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defence. So there's a very short answer to that question, which is no.
How can we avoid coup d'etats in Africa? Do you have an idea?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. I mean, I don't think there's any chance of a coup d'etat in Ghana now, because the Ghanaian people, after so many decades now of democracy and of seeing that they can change their rulers through the ballot box, which has happened, every 8 years, more or less, in Ghana. I don't think the people of Ghana would accept now a military person just coming in and taking over. Of course, it does depend on other things. I mean, for as long, this is more likely if something happens like an economic collapse, right? And there's desperation and complete alienation of the people from their political leaders. But I mentioned Namibia, I mentioned Botswana. In those countries and others, it's also inconceivable in Africa that there could be a military coup. So there's no reason to say it's a natural outcome. It depends on the circumstances, and the more you embed democracy, the less possible it becomes.
True. Now, we see a lot of African countries also borrowing from countries like the UK, where you are right now, the United States and all that. I haven't heard of the UK borrowing money from any country in so long. Do you think...
That's not quite true. You need to unpack that. So, first of all, you have to ask who they're borrowing from. Are they borrowing from private banks? And if these are loans from the banking sector, that's not a governmental thing. That's not the government of Britain telling HSBC they must loan X million to Ghana. That's an arrangement between Ghana and that bank. That's the first thing. Secondly, the British government buys government bonds. It has US government bonds, Japanese government bonds, Euro bonds. So and it sells bonds, which it has to pay back, which is just a different form of indebtedness. So it's a much more complex issue. But I note there was a slogan under the last government in Ghana of Ghana beyond aid. And of course, the way to achieve being beyond aid is to improve the economy. And if you don't improve the economy, you can't break out of that cycle.
Now we have a new leader in Ghana, John Dramani Mahama. I'm sure you interacted with him whilst you were here. Do you think that, looking at things like dollar rate going down as compared to the Ghana cedi and some other such things are something we should start to be happy about?
Well, on the currency, of course, if your currency is weaker, it's not all bad news because it means your exports are cheaper, right? So it's a question of taking advantage of that. I interacted with John Mahama, and a lot of people criticized me for whatever criticisms I made, but I would have made the same criticisms of Akufo-Addo's government. It's just I was there during the Mahama government. Had I been there during the Akufo-Addo government, which I think was a huge disappointment to a lot of people, particularly the latter years, which is why the MPP presumably lost so badly in the last election. My interest is I want to see the people of Ghana flourish. And as you know, I made a major issue of corruption. And although corruption is, of course, a moral issue, it's also, if you want to take the emotion out of it, it's also an economic issue, because corruption is a really bad way of running a country and of allocating resources, right? If people are stealing some of those resources, they're not going to the purposes for which they were meant. And I think it is a problem in Ghana. Obviously, it's worse in some other countries. But the point about, I got on very well with John Mahama on a one-to-one basis. We had many long conversations. I think he means well. I presume, you tell me, but unless there's a change of the constitution, he only has this one term, right? Before he has to step down. 4 years is not very long in politics. I get the sense, and I'm just observing this from a long way away, that he's very determined to make these 4 years really count, and I wish him well with that. But corruption is, we all know it, is sadly a real problem in Ghana, and certainly in my time, no one serious was prosecuted for corruption. Corruption is a nice word. It's a long word. There's another word for it, which is shorter, which is theft. Corruption is theft, right? It's people in public positions abusing that position to enrich themselves while removing that money from the people who are supposed to benefit. And therefore, quite apart from the ethical, moral issue, it means that a few people are making themselves rich, but it definitely making millions of other Ghanaians poorer, because schools don't get built, roads don't get built, or they don't get built properly if the contract goes to somebody's cousin who's not capable of building the road, for example. And so everybody suffers. And corruption is a difficult issue. And if you are going to prosecute people, it's no good only prosecuting people from your political opposition. You must make a statement by also prosecuting people from your own political party who've indulged in those behaviors,
right? To
make it clear that it's unacceptable. And I do hope that something serious happens in these next 4 years, because that is to the cost of all the Ghanaian people.
That is very true. John Benjamin is my guest.